Officer Sarah Mitchell had been patrolling the downtown streets of Chicago for 3 years, but she had never encountered anyone quite like Marcus Thompson. The weather was turning cold in late October, and the homeless population was beginning to seek shelter wherever they could find it. Sarah was making her routine evening rounds when she spotted a man sitting alone on a bench outside the old library. Building Marcus was different from the other homeless individuals she typically encountered. While most people in his situation avoided eye contact with police officers, Marcus watched her approach with steady, intelligent eyes. His clothes were worn and dirty, but there was something about his posture and demeanor that suggested he hadn't always lived on the streets. His beard was unkempt, and his hair hung past his shoulders, but when he spoke, his voice was clear and articulate. "Officer, I need to tell you something important," Marcus said as Sarah walked past his bench. She had planned to simply nod and continue her patrol, but something in his tone made her stop. In her experience, homeless individuals usually asked for money, food, or help with minor issues. They rarely approached officers with such serious urgency. Sarah turned around and studied the man more carefully. Despite his appearance, there was no smell of alcohol on his breath, and his eyes were focused and alert. "What's on your mind?" she asked, keeping a professional but friendly tone. She had learned early in her career that treating everyone with respect, regardless of their circumstances, often led to better outcomes. Marcus stood up slowly, revealing that he was taller than she had initially thought. "There's going to be trouble at the Morrison building tomorrow night," he said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one else was listening. "I've been watching and I've seen things. People have been coming and going at strange hours, carrying things they shouldn't have." The Morrison building was a partially abandoned office complex about 6 blocks away from where they stood. Sarah knew the building had been mostly empty for the past 2 years, with only a few small businesses operating on the ground floor. It wasn't an area that typically drew much police attention, which might have made it attractive to people planning illegal activities. "What kind of things have you seen?" Sarah asked, pulling out her notepad. She had learned to take all tips seriously, even when they came from unexpected sources. Some of the most valuable information she had received during her career had come from people that others might have dismissed. Marcus described seeing men in expensive cars meeting at the building during late evening hours. He had noticed them carrying large bags and boxes into the building through a side entrance. Most concerning was his observation that some of these men appeared to be armed. As someone who had been living on the streets for several months, Marcus had developed a keen eye for spotting potential danger. "I know you probably think I'm just another crazy homeless guy," Marcus continued, "but I used to work in security. I know what suspicious activity looks like, and this feels like something big is being planned." He went on to explain that he had been staying in an alley that provided a clear view of the building's side entrance, which was why he had been able to observe the pattern of activity. Sarah found herself taking Marcus seriously despite her initial skepticism. His observations were detailed and specific, and he seemed genuinely concerned about potential harm to others rather than trying to get something for himself. She asked him several follow-up questions about timing, descriptions of the vehicles and people he had seen, and the exact location of the entrance he had been watching. After gathering all the information Marcus could provide, Sarah thanked him and assured him that she would look into his concerns. As she walked away, she found herself thinking about the conversation. There had been something about Marcus that suggested he was telling the truth. His military-style posture and the way he had described the suspicious activity indicated he might indeed have a background in security or law enforcement. That night, Sarah filed a report about her conversation with Marcus and requested permission to conduct surveillance of the Morrison building. Her supervisor was initially skeptical about acting on information from a homeless individual, but Sarah's track record and her conviction about the tip's validity convinced him to approve a limited investigation. Unknown to Sarah at the time, Marcus Thompson was not just any homeless man. 3 years earlier, he had been a decorated police detective with the Chicago Police Department. A series of personal tragedies, including the loss of his family in a car accident and his subsequent struggle with depression and alcohol, had led to his dismissal from the force and his eventual life on the streets. Despite his current circumstances, his instincts for recognizing criminal activity remained sharp. As Sarah prepared for the next day's shift, She had no idea that Marcus's warning would lead to one of the biggest drug busts in the city's recent history, or that her willingness to listen to him would change both of their lives forever. The homeless man she had briefly spoken with possessed secrets that would soon transform her understanding of judgment, redemption, and the unexpected ways that help can come from the most unlikely sources. The next evening, Sarah positioned herself across from the Morrison building with her partner, Officer James Rodriguez. They had been watching for 2 hours without seeing anything unusual when James began to question whether they were wasting their time. "Sarah, are you sure about this homeless guy's tip? We've been sitting here all night with nothing to show for it," he said, adjusting his position in the unmarked police car. Sarah was beginning to have her own doubts when she spotted a black SUV pulling up to the building's side entrance. The vehicle's windows were tinted, and it parked in an area that was partially hidden from the main street view. "There," she whispered to James, pointing toward the building. That's exactly where Marcus said they would be. 2 men emerged from the SUV, both dressed in expensive suits that seemed out of place for the rundown neighborhood. They moved quickly and purposefully toward the side entrance, carrying what appeared to be briefcases. One of the men kept looking around nervously, as if checking to make sure they weren't being watched. Their behavior was exactly as Marcus had described. Within minutes, another vehicle arrived, a white van that looked like it might be used for deliveries. 3 more men got out of this vehicle, and they began unloading several large boxes from the back. Even from their distant observation point, Sarah and James could see that the men were handling the boxes with unusual care, as if they contained something valuable or dangerous. "Okay, you were right to trust your homeless friend," James admitted, reaching for his radio. "This definitely looks suspicious. Should we call for backup now?" Sarah nodded, but she wanted to gather more evidence before making their move. She had learned from her training that rushing into a situation without understanding its full scope could be dangerous. As they continued to watch, more vehicles arrived at the building. The pattern was exactly as Marcus had predicted: expensive cars and commercial vehicles arriving separately but within a short time window. The men moving between the vehicles and the building all seemed to know exactly what they were doing, suggesting this was a well-organized operation rather than a spontaneous gathering. Sarah used her binoculars to get better views of the license plates and the faces of the individuals involved. She was surprised to recognize one of the men as someone she had seen before in police briefings about suspected drug trafficking operations. This recognition made her realize that Marcus had potentially helped them uncover a significant criminal enterprise. "James, I think we're looking at a major drug operation," Sarah said quietly into her radio. "Request immediate backup and contact Detective Bureau for surveillance support." She was careful to keep her voice low, even though they were positioned too far away for the suspects to hear them. The last thing she wanted was to alert the criminals to police presence before backup arrived. Meanwhile, Marcus Thompson was staying in his usual spot in the alley, but he was watching the police activity from a distance. He had noticed the unmarked police car earlier and felt a sense of satisfaction that Officer Mitchell had taken his warning seriously. However, as he observed the situation developing, his experienced eye caught something that the officers might have missed. From his position, Marcus could see that there were additional men positioned around the building's perimeter. These appeared to be lookouts or security personnel for the operation. He realized that Sarah and James might be walking into a more dangerous situation than they anticipated. The criminals had clearly planned for the possibility of law enforcement intervention. Marcus faced a difficult decision. He could stay hidden and safe in his alley, or he could try to warn the officers about the additional security measures he had observed. Moving from his position would expose him to potential danger from both the criminals and law enforcement officers who might not recognize him as the source of the original tip. After watching 2 more vehicles arrive at the building, Marcus made his choice. He carefully made his way through the shadows toward the position where he had seen the unmarked police car. He needed to find a way to communicate with Officer Mitchell without alerting the criminals or startling the police officers. As backup units began arriving in the area, the situation became more complex. The criminals inside the building apparently had their own surveillance system, because Marcus could see increased activity around the building's entrances. It appeared that the people inside were preparing either to flee or to defend their position. Sarah received confirmation from her supervisor that they were authorized to proceed with arrests. But she was growing concerned about the number of vehicles and people involved. What had started as a simple investigation based on a homeless man's tip was rapidly developing into a major law enforcement operation. She found herself thinking about Marcus and wondering how he had known to warn her about something this significant. Unknown to Sarah, Marcus was now positioned much closer to the action than she realized. His knowledge of police procedures and criminal behavior was guiding his movements as he tried to help ensure the safety of the officers who had believed in him. The next few minutes would test everyone involved and reveal truths that no one could have anticipated when a homeless man first approached a police officer with a warning about suspicious activity. As the police backup units moved into position around the Morrison building, Marcus Thompson found himself caught between two worlds that had once been his entire life. From his hiding spot behind a dumpster, he could see that the officers were about to make a serious tactical error. The criminals had posted armed guards in positions that the police hadn't detected, and Sarah and her team were walking into what could become a deadly ambush. Marcus knew he had seconds to make a decision that could save lives or cost him his own. Despite having lost everything that had once mattered to him, his instinct to protect fellow officers remained stronger than his fear. He stepped out of the shadows and began moving carefully toward the nearest police position, keeping his hands visible and moving slowly to avoid being mistaken for a threat. "Officer Mitchell," Marcus called out in a loud whisper as he approached the unmarked car where Sarah was coordinating with her backup units. "There are armed men positioned around the building that you haven't seen. They're waiting for you to move in." Sarah turned around, startled to see Marcus approaching their position during an active police operation. Her first instinct was to order him to leave the area for his own safety, but the urgency in his voice and the specific nature of his warning made her listen. "Where exactly?" she asked quickly, trusting the same instincts that had led her to believe his original tip. Marcus pointed to 3 different locations around the building where he had observed men taking concealed positions with what appeared to be firearms. His descriptions were precise and detailed, using terminology that surprised Sarah with its accuracy. He described the positions like someone with tactical training, noting fields of fire and potential escape routes with the expertise of a law enforcement professional. "How do you know so much about tactical positioning?" Sarah asked, even as she was relaying Marcus's information to her backup units through her radio. Something about his knowledge and the way he carried himself was beginning to make her suspect that Marcus Thompson was not just any homeless individual. Before Marcus could answer, the situation at the building escalated dramatically. The criminals had apparently decided to flee rather than wait for the police to close in. Men began emerging from multiple exits, some carrying weapons and others loading boxes and bags into the waiting vehicles. The scene quickly transformed from a surveillance operation into an active pursuit situation. Sarah and her fellow officers moved to intercept the fleeing suspects, but Marcus's warning about the concealed guards proved to be crucial. Officers were able to avoid walking into the ambush positions and instead approached from angles that gave them tactical advantages. The arrest operation that could have resulted in officer casualties instead proceeded with professional efficiency. During the arrests, police discovered one of the largest drug processing and distribution operations the city had seen in years. The boxes and bags that Marcus had observed being carried into the building contained hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of illegal drugs, along with weapons, cash, and detailed records of distribution networks throughout the region. As the scene was being secured and suspects were being processed, Detective Captain Patricia Wong arrived to oversee the operation. She was impressed by the scale of the bust and wanted to understand how the police had learned about the operation. When Sarah explained about the tip from Marcus Thompson, Captain Wong asked to speak with him personally. Marcus had remained at the scene, helping officers by providing additional details about his observations of the criminal operation. When Captain Wong approached him, she studied his face carefully. Something about his appearance seemed familiar, though she couldn't immediately place where she might have seen him before. "Mr. Thompson, your information was incredibly valuable tonight," Captain Wong said. "Your detailed knowledge of the suspect's activities and your understanding of tactical procedures helped us avoid what could have been a dangerous situation for our officers. Can you tell me how you knew so much about police operations?" Marcus looked at Captain Wong for a long moment, realizing that she was beginning to recognize him despite his changed appearance. 3 years of living on the streets had transformed him physically, but his mannerisms and the way he spoke about police work were apparently still recognizable to someone who had known him in his previous life. "Captain Wong," Marcus said quietly, "I don't know if you remember me. I used to work with the Chicago Police Department. Detective Marcus Thompson, badge number 2847. I worked in narcotics and organized crime cases until 3 years ago." The recognition hit Captain Wong like a physical shock. Marcus Thompson had been one of the department's most talented detectives before personal tragedy had led to his dismissal. She had heard rumors that he had been living on the streets, but seeing him in person brought home the full reality of how far he had fallen from his former position. Sarah watched this exchange with growing amazement. The homeless man who had approached her with a warning had turned out to be a former police detective whose expertise had made the night's operation possible. She began to understand why his observations had been so accurate and why he had seemed different from other homeless individuals she had encountered. The revelation of Marcus's true identity would soon lead to consequences that none of them could have anticipated, as word of his role in the successful operation spread through the department and reached people who remembered his distinguished service before his personal downfall. News of Marcus Thompson's involvement in the drug bust spread quickly through the Chicago Police Department. Officers who had worked with him before his dismissal were shocked to learn that the decorated detective had been living on the streets for 3 years. Many remembered him as one of the most dedicated and skilled investigators the department had ever employed, making his fall from grace all the more tragic. Sarah Mitchell found herself deeply affected by the revelation of Marcus's identity. Over the following days, she couldn't stop thinking about how differently she might have treated him if she had known he was a former police officer. The fact that she had listened to him based solely on his credibility and the urgency of his warning, rather than his appearance or circumstances, made her proud of her instincts but also sad about his situation. Captain Wong decided to investigate Marcus's case more thoroughly. She pulled his personnel file and discovered the full story of his downfall. 3 years earlier, Marcus had been one of the department's rising stars with commendations for bravery and an impressive record of successful investigations. His life had been destroyed in a single evening when a drunk driver killed his wife and 8-year-old daughter while they were returning from a school event. The investigation revealed that Marcus had initially tried to cope with his grief while continuing to work, but the loss of his family had been overwhelming. He had begun drinking heavily and his job performance had suffered. Despite offers of counseling and support from the department, Marcus had been unable to overcome his depression and alcoholism. Eventually, his behavior had become erratic enough that the department had no choice but to dismiss him. After losing his job, Marcus had quickly lost his home and his savings. Pride had prevented him from accepting help from former colleagues, and shame had driven him away from friends and family members who had tried to support him. He had ended up living on the streets, where his police training had actually helped him survive in dangerous situations, but couldn't help him overcome his personal demons. Sarah requested permission to visit Marcus and offer him assistance. She found him at a homeless shelter where he had been staying since the night of the drug bust. The success of his tip and the positive reception from the police had given him enough confidence to seek shelter indoors, rather than continuing to sleep in alleys and abandoned buildings. "Marcus, I wanted to thank you again for your help," Sarah said as they sat in the shelter's common room. "Your warning probably saved lives that night, but I also wanted to ask if there's anything I can do to help you get back on your feet." Marcus appreciated Sarah's offer, but he was realistic about his situation. "Officer Mitchell, I'm grateful for your kindness, but I've been living this way for 3 years. I'm not the same person I was when I wore a badge. The drinking, the depression, the loss of everything I cared about, those things don't just go away because I helped with one case." However, Sarah's visit had planted a seed of hope in Marcus's mind. For the first time in years, he had felt useful and competent when helping with the investigation. The experience had reminded him of who he used to be and what he was capable of when he wasn't consumed by grief and alcohol. He began to consider the possibility that maybe his life wasn't completely over. Word of Marcus's situation reached Police Chief Robert Harrison, who remembered the former detective's excellent service record. Chief Harrison had been looking for ways to address the city's growing homelessness problem, while also finding innovative approaches to community policing. Marcus's case gave him an idea that could potentially help both issues. The chief arranged a meeting with Marcus, offering him an opportunity to work with the police department as a civilian consultant on homeless outreach and community intelligence. The position would provide him with a modest income and help him transition off the streets while utilizing his unique understanding of both law, enforcement, and homelessness. Marcus was initially skeptical about the offer. He worried that his past problems with alcohol and his current circumstances made him unsuitable for any kind of official role, even as a civilian consultant. He also feared that working with police again might trigger memories of his previous life that could send him back into depression. Sarah encouraged Marcus to consider the chief's offer seriously. She pointed out that his experience living on the streets had given him insights that could be valuable for helping other homeless individuals and for understanding criminal activity in areas where traditional policing was less effective. His success in identifying the drug operation proved that his skills as an investigator remained sharp despite his personal struggles. After several days of consideration, Marcus decided to accept the position on a trial basis. He knew that rebuilding his life would be a long and difficult process, but the opportunity to use his abilities to help others gave him a sense of purpose that he hadn't felt since losing his family. The position would also provide him with structure and support that could help him address his ongoing struggles with depression and alcoholism. The decision to bring Marcus back into the police department family, even in a civilian capacity, would prove to be controversial among some officers and city officials. However, it would also lead to unexpected successes in community outreach and crime prevention that no one could have predicted when a homeless man first approached a female police officer with a warning about suspicious activity. Marcus Thompson's return to working with the Chicago Police Department, even as a civilian consultant, created both opportunities and challenges that no one had fully anticipated. His first weeks in the new position were difficult as he struggled to adapt to having structure and responsibilities again after 3 years of survival-focused living on the streets. The homeless outreach program that Marcus helped develop proved to be remarkably effective. His ability to communicate with homeless individuals from a position of understanding and shared experience allowed him to build trust in ways that traditional social workers and police officers often could not. Many homeless people who had previously avoided contact with authorities began approaching Marcus for help and information. Sarah Mitchell was assigned to work closely with Marcus on several community policing initiatives. She observed how his approach to interacting with homeless individuals was completely different from standard police procedures. Instead of viewing them as potential problems to be managed, Marcus treated each person as an individual with a unique story and specific needs that could be addressed with the right resources and support. Within 2 months of beginning his new role, Marcus had helped police solve 3 additional criminal cases by gathering information from homeless individuals who had witnessed illegal activities. His network of contacts in the homeless community became an invaluable source of intelligence about drug dealing, theft, and other crimes occurring in areas where police presence was limited. However, Marcus's transition was not without setbacks. The stress of returning to a work environment and the memories triggered by being around police officers again led to several relapses with alcohol. Sarah and Captain Wong worked with him to find counseling resources and to adjust his responsibilities during particularly difficult periods. The success of Marcus's outreach work began attracting attention from city officials and social service agencies. Mayor Jennifer Collins visited the program and was impressed by the results Marcus was achieving in connecting homeless individuals with services and reducing crime in downtown areas. She authorized funding for an expansion of the program and asked Marcus to train other officers in his methods. During one of his outreach visits, Marcus encountered Jennifer Walsh, a homeless woman with 2 young children who had been living in their car for several weeks. Jennifer had lost her job and apartment after a medical emergency depleted her savings, and she was struggling to navigate the complex system of social services while caring for her children and searching for work. Marcus's experience with loss and rebuilding helped him understand Jennifer's situation in ways that went beyond professional training. He spent hours helping her complete applications for assistance programs connecting her with child care resources, and even accompanying her to job interviews when she needed someone to watch her children. His efforts helped Jennifer secure temporary housing and eventually find stable employment. The case with Jennifer Walsh demonstrated how Marcus's personal experience with hitting rock bottom gave him unique insights into helping others rebuild their lives. Word of his success began spreading beyond Chicago, and other police departments started inquiring about implementing similar programs using former officers who had overcome personal challenges. Sarah noticed significant changes in Marcus as he continued working in his new role. The sense of purpose and the positive feedback he received from helping others seemed to be gradually healing some of the emotional wounds that had driven him to the streets. While he still struggled with depression and occasionally with alcohol, he was developing coping strategies and support systems that helped him manage these challenges. Chief Harrison decided to make Marcus's position permanent and offered him the opportunity to develop a comprehensive program for training officers in homeless outreach and community engagement. The program would combine Marcus's law enforcement experience with his first-hand knowledge of homelessness to create training materials that could be used throughout the department and potentially shared with other cities. Marcus accepted the permanent position, but he also made a personal decision that surprised everyone who knew him. He enrolled in a community college program to study social work, wanting to complement his law enforcement background with formal training in helping people overcome personal crises and social challenges. As Marcus worked on developing the training program, he often reflected on the night when he had approached Officer Mitchell with his warning about the Morrison building. That single decision to trust a police officer with information had set in motion a series of events that had transformed his life and created opportunities to help others in ways he never could have imagined. Sarah continued to work closely with Marcus and became one of his strongest supporters within the department. She had learned valuable lessons about the importance of listening to people regardless of their circumstances, and about how quickly someone's life could change for better or worse. Their partnership had evolved into a friendship based on mutual respect and shared commitment to community service. The success of Marcus's program was beginning to attract national attention, but the most significant test of his transformation was yet to come. A crisis situation would soon arise that would require him to draw upon all of his experience as both a former detective and a formerly homeless individual, testing his ability to help others while continuing his own journey of recovery and redemption. 1 year after Marcus Thompson had first approached Officer Sarah Mitchell with his warning about the Morrison building, a crisis arose that would test everything he had learned and rebuilt during his journey from the streets back to serving his community. A homeless veteran named David Rodriguez had barricaded himself inside an abandoned warehouse after a mental health episode, threatening to harm himself and refusing to communicate with police officers or paramedics. The situation had begun when David, who suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, had been evicted from the shelter where he had been staying. The stress of losing his temporary home had triggered a severe psychological crisis, and he had broken into the warehouse seeking a place to hide from what he perceived as threatening situations and people around him. Standard police protocols for dealing with barricaded individuals had failed to make any progress with David. Officers had been trying to establish communication for several hours, but David's military training and his current mental state made him extremely suspicious of anyone in uniform. The situation was becoming increasingly dangerous as David's behavior grew more erratic and unpredictable. Captain Wong called Marcus to the scene, hoping that his experience with both homelessness and law enforcement might provide insights that could help resolve the situation peacefully. When Marcus arrived, he could see that the warehouse was surrounded by police cars, ambulances, and crisis intervention specialists, but none of them had been able to establish meaningful contact with David. Marcus studied the situation and recognized several factors that the other responders might not have considered. As a former homeless individual, he understood the fear and paranoia that could develop from living on the streets, especially for someone dealing with mental health issues. As a former police detective, he could assess the tactical situation and understand why conventional approaches weren't working. "Let me try talking to him," Marcus suggested to Captain Wong. "But I need to do it without any visible police presence." David probably sees all the uniforms and vehicles as a threat. Give me some space to approach this differently. Captain Wong was hesitant to allow a civilian consultant to take the lead in such a dangerous situation, but she trusted Marcus's judgment and was running out of other options. Marcus asked all uniformed personnel to pull back to positions where David couldn't see them from inside the warehouse. Then he approached the building alone, wearing civilian clothes and carrying no visible equipment or weapons. He identified himself to David not as a police consultant, but as someone who had also been homeless and who understood what David was going through. "David, my name is Marcus, and I've been where you are right now," Marcus called out toward the warehouse. "I know what it feels like to have nowhere to go and to feel like everyone is against you. I spent 3 years living on the streets after I lost everything that mattered to me. I'm not here to arrest you or force you to do anything. I just want to talk." For the first time in hours, David responded. His voice was shaky and filled with fear, but he was willing to listen to someone who spoke to him as an equal, rather than as a problem to be solved. Marcus spent nearly an hour sharing his own story of loss, homelessness, and gradual recovery, creating a connection based on shared experience rather than professional authority. Gradually, David began opening up about his own struggles. He had served 2 tours of duty overseas before returning home with injuries and psychological trauma that had made it difficult for him to maintain employment and housing. The lack of adequate support for veterans dealing with mental health issues had led to his current situation on the streets. Marcus realized that David's case was similar to his own in many ways. Both men had served their community in uniform, both had experienced devastating losses that had led to their downfall, and both had struggled with the shame of needing help after having been in positions of strength and authority. This understanding allowed Marcus to communicate with David in ways that addressed his specific fears and concerns. After 2 hours of patient conversation, Marcus convinced David to accept medical help and to come out of the warehouse peacefully. The crisis that could have ended tragically was resolved without injury to anyone involved, and David was transported to a veterans' mental health facility where he could receive appropriate treatment for his psychological trauma. The successful resolution of David's crisis marked a turning point in how the Chicago Police Department handled situations involving homeless individuals with mental health issues. Marcus's approach demonstrated the value of understanding and empathy over force and authority in dealing with people who were struggling with complex personal problems. Sarah Mitchell watched the entire situation unfold and felt proud of how far Marcus had come since the night he had first approached her with information about suspicious activity. The homeless man who had once warned her about danger had become someone capable of saving lives and helping others find hope in their darkest moments. 6 months later, Marcus Thompson received a commendation from the mayor of Chicago for his contributions to community policing and homeless outreach. At the ceremony, he stood alongside Sarah Mitchell and Captain Wong, representing the power of second chances and the importance of recognizing potential in unexpected places. The program Marcus had developed was being implemented in police departments across the country, and he had completed his social work degree while continuing his work as a consultant. David Rodriguez had successfully completed treatment and was working with Veterans Services to help other former military personnel who were struggling with homelessness and mental health issues. As Marcus looked back on the journey that had begun with a simple decision to warn a police officer about suspicious activity, he realized that sometimes the most important changes in life come from small acts of courage and trust. His willingness to approach Sarah Mitchell that night had not only led to a successful criminal investigation, but had ultimately saved his own life and created opportunities for him to help save the lives of others. The partnership between Marcus and Sarah continued as they worked together on new initiatives to address the complex relationships between homelessness, mental health, and public safety. Their story had become an inspiration for others throughout the law enforcement community, proving that redemption and second chances were possible even in the most challenging circumstances.